Okay, let me just double check. Are you all seeing a full screen?
I am.
Okay, good. Just making sure I got the right thing in front of everybody. Welcome, folks. We're going to just let people sort of get situated in the room before we kick off officially. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're glad you're here. We're just letting a few folks find their way here from the waiting room. I'll go ahead and ask folks that have joined to mute their microphones. Karl is such a busy man today that he's in a quasi-public space, so we may get a little bit of influx from his site, but we'll try to keep that to a minimum for the rest of us. I'm going to go ahead and launch. In fact, Karl, maybe you want to mute for now, and then if that's not hard, and then we'll unmute you when we hand you over the talking stick. Everybody, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad we've had a little bit of rain in the area. Really appreciate you all joining us. My name is Elizabeth Beggins. I am the Agriculture Outreach Specialist for the Million Acre Challenge, which is a collaborative project supported by American Farmland Trust, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Future Harvest, in addition to many other ag partners across the region. We are working to advance soil health on 1 million acres of agricultural land in the Chesapeake Bay region by 2030. We do have a quick poll that we'd like everybody to take part in. It just gives us a chance to see who's here and kind of a little bit about what you're interested in. These are often designed for a farmer audience, so you'll note that as you go through them, but I think it still applies to folks who are here wearing a different hat. So let me see if I can go ahead and launch the poll. Okay, hopefully you can see that. If you're on the phone or can't access it, you're welcome to put this information in chat. We've basically just asked why you're here, under which umbrella you're standing. Are you a farmer? Do you want to be a farmer? Are you a farm service provider, an academic or a researcher, an ag retailer, or something else? And what are you interested in knowing more about as relates to regenerative ag? Funding opportunities for soil health practices, farmer-to-farmer networking, mixed species cover crops, and so forth. So feel free to weigh in on the poll, and I'll carry on while we let some of that information come in. What you will see on this slide is some of the work of the Million Acre Challenge, including our soil health benchmark study, which is offered through PASA, the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Ag. And that is headed up by my colleague, Lisa Garfield, who works with Future Harvest. If you'd like more information about how you can join that research project or help promote it, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also want to highlight our farmer-to-farmer networking opportunities. This is one of them, our monthly lunch and learns. We also hold a number of field days. We have advanced farmer-to-farmer networks. All of these things are designed to put producers in community with each other. And really the most important point is that we are a farmer-focused initiative. We really see farmers as the experts, and we recognize that they are mostly already working to steward their land with the tools and resources that they have, and our purpose is to try to help them do that. All right, let's see here. Ending our poll. Let's see what we got. Looks like nobody took part in our poll. Nobody wants to be known. Either that or something's gone. There's been a tech glitch. But anyway, all good. We welcome you to the opportunity. This is just a quick PSA. I will encourage, as we go forward, to turn your cameras on so that we can see each other. If you missed the very beginning, feel free to add your name in the chat box and what brings you here today, if you're a farmer or an ag service provider or something else. And we'd love to engage with you beyond this event. Really would encourage you to join the Million Acre Challenge. That does not require that you have to be a farmer. That QR code on this slide will take you to our sign up form. And really, this is just a chance for us to sort of build our community, to know who is involved in this initiative across the region. And if you are managing land, it gives us a chance to count your acres toward our important goal. We also are on social media, so you can engage with us there. And you will find at the bottom of this slide my email address and Lisa Garfield's. As I said, the Million Acre Challenge is a collaborative, so that's why our email addresses look different. All right, now I get closer to the meat of the matter. I want to introduce our guest today, Karl Blankenship, although I don't really know how much of an introduction he needs. Karl founded both the Bay Journal and the Bay Journal Media. He has won a number of awards in recognition for his work, including a 2001 Excellence in Journalism Award from Renewable Natural Resources Foundation. And he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation a number of years ago. So we're sort of smiling about the fact that Karl has a lot of work still to do, and he's already got a Lifetime Achievement Award in his pocket. Before the Bay Journal, he was a reporter at the Harrisburg Patriot News and Saginaw News. He is a graduate of Michigan State University with a degree in journalism. Karl, we are so grateful that you are willing to spend some time with us today. I think I speak for most people in the room when I applaud your recent Bay Journal articles. They have just been a real beacon for the work that we are all interested in pursuing. In case for some reason you have not seen those articles, here are the title slides for both of them. You'll find them on the Bay Journal website, bayjournal.com, and highly encourage you to take a look at those. And at this point, I do get to sort of hand the talking stick off to Karl, and I'm going to launch with sort of a meaty question. Karl, I'd like you to give us a little, just sort of center us in your background, how you came to launch the Bay Journal, but also the background of the Bay cleanup effort and kind of how that relates to its approach to agriculture. And thanks again for being here.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can all see something besides this beautiful SAB photo.
Yeah, so how I got started in this is I was a reporter at the Patriot News, where I helped create the environment beat there. And actually, when I was there, we created a weekly environment page that was back in the 1980s. And then at that time, I'd occasionally talk to Cindy Adams Dunn, who is now Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources in Pennsylvania. But at that time, she was with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and they had a position opening up in outreach. And she lobbied me and ultimately convinced me to switch jobs. And I thought it would be a good way to get in-depth learning on environmental issues. And so I made that switch in 1990 and started writing about the Bay. And then the following year, I created the Bay Journal, which really took off and became fairly popular with people. And I've been writing about the Chesapeake Bay ever since. A couple of years ago, after doing that for like 30 years, I stepped back from being editor. And, at that point, I thought I'd spend my time writing about fun things like fish and forest and critters and stuff like that. But, as I thought about more about what to spend my time on, I just increasingly was thinking, when I walked in the door doing base stuff, it was recognized that agriculture was like the biggest source of nutrients reaching the bay. And it still was, and it just kind of seemed to be this intractable issue. And I thought, maybe I should spend some time, more time looking at that and understanding what was going on. And I would say that at that time, I actually thought I knew a lot about agriculture because I had been going to Bay meetings. It was always a big Bay issue. I'd been going to Bay meetings for 30 years and writing about different ag stuff on and on, off and on. But, in the last couple of years, as I've spent a lot more time thinking and focusing on this, I've told a number of people that, basically what I've learned is going to a lot of Chesapeake Bay meetings is really a horrible way to learn about agriculture. And I've spent a lot of the last couple of years kind of unlearning a lot of things that I thought I knew and rethinking through things. And um y- and,
That's
and
really,
just the whole question of, when I talk about agriculture, that increasingly just seems like a strange word in a way because agriculture is so many types of things. Agriculture in the Eastern Shore is different than agriculture on in Lancaster County, and even within those places, they have all sorts of different types of operations. And so, in a way, it also seems kind of weird just to lump them together. Um,
so
but
that may relate to sort of the cleanup effort and how your perspective on how that the launch of that approached agriculture, or maybe could have approached it differently.
yeah, kind of. And as somebody who went through, decades of Bay meetings, that when you don't necessarily see this in real time, but when I go back and look at it, um, agriculture is kind of gets to be seen like in the Bay context as the bad guy. They're like the big polluters. They're the big source of nutrients and stuff. And it tends to it kind of creates, I think, an inherent bias that people don't actually even recognize sometimes and frame some of the conversations without actually looking. And when you only look at it from the water quality perspective, you only see one thing. And when you start, I had the good fortune, I actually live next to a farmer, actually someone who does a lot of stuff with CBF. And, I've talked to him over the years and started to go to Bay meetings or agricultural meetings with him. And it was just interesting to learn more and more about ag and all the different pressures and decision points that any individual farmer is faced with on a daily basis. And, what you come to realize is that water quality may be something that's important to them. They have a lot of other pressures they're responding to. First of all, they need to stay in business. Um, you know, it's amazing how many balls they're juggling at the same time. And although it's something I knew in the back of my mind, it's just something that I have gained more of a appreciation for. And when you start looking at it, you begin to realize, as I wrote in the first story, that um, the economics that a farmer deals with are pretty important, and the things that drive more production and stuff and profitability to stay in business. And um and I think a lot of people aren't totally cognizant of um how finding um solutions for the Bay issues need to take that into account. because they can have pretty direct ramifications, and they can, the consequences for agriculture in terms of the impacts can be really substantial. And so, part of what I came to think, and part of what I'm hoping that the series that I'm working on, and these stories will be actually running probably through the end of next year. I've got so many outlined, but just to create a better conversation, I think the conversations in the past haven't always been great, and just having a more forthright conversation about the Bay, about farming, and paths forward would just be a really good thing to have happen.
Yeah, I'm picking up on the relationship component of what you just said with your neighbor farmer, and I think that is something you've suggested could have been in place with some of the original efforts, and there's some other thoughts you have about kind of what was missing or what should have had more emphasis.
Yeah, that, the relationship is really an interesting question, because in the course, one of the most striking things to me is in the course of like scores and scores and scores of interviews, it is that the way people view agriculture and how people think agriculture should be dealt with in the Bay context is almost directly related to how much knowledge they have about farms and how much interaction they have with farmers. And the more interaction they have, the more they see the complexity of the issues, and they see it as an issue that requires a process to work through that's very difficult, whereas people who don't have those interactions tend to see it in much more simplistic terms. And that came through in a lot of conversations, because a lot of people kind of made that journey over time. They started in positions where they didn't have that interaction, but as they gained those interactions, their perspectives really changed. And that holds for people in government, for in environmental groups, and even in estuarine researchers. I know some people who started out with this single focus on the Bay, and as they began working more with ag, they may still see it as an issue that needs to be dealt with to improve Bay health, but the ways they think it should be addressed kind of evolve. And so that sociologic aspect is intriguing to me. And so, nobody likes to hear, when you've been at something for decades, that, part of the solution is more talk. But, I think that's actually one of the takeaways that we can take out of the last few decades, is that conversations are important. And there's some evidence of that, I would suggest. And I would point to EPA, which really has had a horrible relationship with farming. And, they're always comfortable working with the regulated entities, like industrial dischargers, wastewater treatment plants. And when EPA was, after 2000, when they began slowly trying to figure out more effective ways to deal with the Bay, they spent a lot of time talking to the wastewater treatment plants and come up with a strategy and technologies to regulate that point source, the discharges at the end of the pipe. They came up with a plan that took a lot of their input and was really flexible, and has resulted in huge nutrient reductions to the Bay. And interestingly, I know, to the surprise of a lot of people at EPA, didn't result in any suits from the wastewater treatment plant sector. But that type of thing never really happened with the agricultural sector. It was almost like people thought, well, we just don't talk to them. And I went back and reread comments on the TMDL, and you actually see frustration expressed by people that we had no conversations on that. But in recent years, You know, I do think EPA deserves a little bit of credit in that they have tried to ramp up those conversations. And you're seeing that take um, bearing fruit in places like Lancaster and Pennsylvania, where they actually are doing things hand in hand with Farm Bureau, with the conservation districts, including even working with Farm Bureau on some, in some ways, actually on farm inspections and things. And that's something that I think would have been unheard of, just a decade ago. But it tells you that, by getting people on the same page, it's too early to say what the result of that is, but it does kind of give you a sense of, what could have been if we had started doing this sooner.
So we can't separate the two conversations of what has happened and what is going to happen. They're intrinsically linked, but I kind of want to fast forward. We're not going to meet our 2025 goals. What can we do? What didn't we do? What about research? What about funding? What are some of the things that you've come across in your 30 years of research and writing that might speak to those things?
Well, I think we never really, especially when you're getting into the agricultural issues, I don't think we ever invested enough money in research. I think it was just always assumed this was something that, the land grant universities and stuff were doing. But, we just don't really have great research and data on the effectiveness of BMPs, nutrient processing in the watershed, and, whether those are producing the types of results that we expect and why or why not. We really haven't invested a lot in fine scale monitoring and things. We do a lot with modeling, but we don't really have a lot of data often to support some of the information that feeds into that model. And that has just created a lot of distrust in the system, in the agriculture sector. Almost to a person you can talk to, people don't think that what they do is adequately reflected. They're not getting credit. And there's just not confidence. And in a way, the investments weren't made to really provide that confidence. And that's because, if you go back, this was always early on, especially, this was seen like as the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest thing to do. These were going to be common sense solutions and stuff. And we, because a lot of ag people weren't engaged, and it is fair to say that there's blame on both sides here, because a lot of people in agriculture, especially early on, didn't want any part of the Bay. And so it's not just on the Bay people here. Early on, that communication worked in both ways. But we just we because it was seen as simple, a question of if we just put enough BMPs on the land, we'll get there. It wasn't seen as necessary to make these types of investments. Plus, everybody thought this could be done in like 10-year timeframes. It was going to be done by 2000, it's going to be done by 2010. And when you have those timeframes, it's hard to set up research projects, especially with water quality monitoring, where you get any types of results. And I've talked to a lot of managers who say, why do I want to take my money from this and put it into monitoring or this type of research, because I'm never going to get results that I can apply before the next deadline's coming. And so we created a system, not intentionally, but it's something you see in hindsight. We created a system that really didn't support learning and, what people nowadays would call adaptive management.
Let's talk about the tension a little bit between setting goals and having timelines and the emotional, intellectual impact that might have on feeling like you can actually make a difference or get something done.
Yeah, when I talk to a lot of people, the frustration with goals and time frames, when you start putting things out there that people immediately see as not realistic and not doable, it makes, it does create this impression of, why do I even want to start this? And you hear that, whether it's from farmers, conservation district people, even within the Bay program, people largely don't view the plans that they write as implementable. And it's just bad if you are working with a system where you have just that low level of confidence that permeates the entire system. And I think one of the key challenges going forward is figuring out how to make that work. And I think that's a quandary because, I don't think these 10-year timeframes, 15-year timeframes work. But the question is, what type of a system do you have that creates the pressure to keep working, moving forward, and make progress, and have a time frame that people see in the distance? Because everyone agrees you need goals and things to as drivers, and that really, is something that is confounding to people, is trying to figure out how you balance that. How do you have goals that keep driving the system but allow longer time frames and keep them realistic?
So I think the social science component that we talked about a few minutes ago may relate to that, so that people feel invested in what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and in Pennsylvania, I think it is interesting what they did for their phase 3 whip, because it wasn't uniform in every county, but many of the counties did have very good efforts that did bring a lot of people together, and to address common goals. Like, it wasn't just a Bay conversation, is how we can meet some local goals and this support it. But I think it's interesting that and there's a lesson to be learned, that they went through this process. Lancaster is a good place to talk about. They went through this process, and they got Farm Bureau, they got lots of people together to work on this. They came up with a plan which they consider to be quite a stretch plan, but it's got like a 2040 time frame, and it actually only achieves 75% of the goal, and it would require sustained funding, more sustained technical support. And it's a stretch to reach that, but that's kind of educational, that if you want to have something that people on implementing it see as both a stretch but realistic, that didn't achieve like the quote unquote Bay goals, but it is something that people see as driving efforts forward. And there's a lot of energy in Lancaster County right now.
So folks, we do have to let Karl go 5 minutes before we thought, because he has another commitment. And so we're gonna wrap this up in another 15 minutes. And I'd really like to encourage those of you who are in the audience at this point to jump in with questions. I'm sure you have things that you're interested in Karl's perspective on. I'll remind everyone, Karl's not a scientist, he's a journalist. So let's be careful to ask questions that are appropriate to somebody who has come at this work through the journalism lens. But anybody have questions they'd like to put out there? Doug? We can't hear you just yet for some reason, Doug. It's interesting. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I can't hear you. You're welcome to put it in chat if you want. Or, yeah. I'm not the only one who can't hear Doug, right?
I can't.
He said he's going to put it in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. Other questions while Doug gets that written down and we can circle back?
Okay, I've got one. Carl, you've seen agriculture change a lot over the years since you've been working on this since the 90s, and animal agriculture has gotten a bit more consolidated, with more animals, perhaps on less land, or small farms being bought up, becoming bigger farms. And with my work with CBF, I'm helping getting conservation, funding to some of these farmers for practices. And I'm curious your thoughts after seeing things change over the years. Are we going at it the right way of getting conservation funding to perhaps these bigger farms, or do we need, and a lot of times that might leave out farms that already are farming in a water quality, soil health friendly way, perhaps creating a disparity of equity issues of providing funds to farmers that may have pollution issues, and then no funds to the farms that are already water quality friendly, creating that food cost gap, which may hurt the other farmers. So what's your over the years, what's your general thoughts on, I mean, it's about producing food. What's your general thought on the way that we're going about things?
Yeah, that's a really tough question because on one hand, I think it's true, and in this I'm basically going through what people have told me because I don't have a lot of direct knowledge on some of this. But people basically tell me that the larger, more profitable operations tend to be cleaner, at least on a per unit of production basis, because they have the capital to work with and make investments. They can buy better equipment to do things more precisely and stuff. Although they can aggregate more pollution on the locally because they're more intense. But in terms of total, it could be a lesser impact if it's all spread around. And the larger problems are often on smaller farms where they don't have the capital to invest. And where I am is a lot of small farms, and you can see that where people are really stressed. I don't understand why some people do this business because they're just working all the time, and it's tough, but it's not uniform. I know my neighbor, the farmer I mentioned before, and I, both drive around the countryside near us and look at what's happening on the land, and he and I have both flagged what is like one of the more profitable operations around here, and it's like their cows are always in the stream, and it's like, well, you've got the money to like fence that stream. Why aren't you doing a better job? And so it's not uniform.
Great question, and thanks, Carl. Doug has asked in chat, and I'll just read this verbatim, would be interested in your perspective on the quote, agriculture as the largest source statement. From the Bay program perspective, that's a function of the number of acres of ag land use in the watershed, but I'm sorry, I'm missing a word here, but heard by farmers that we blame them for the pollution. How can the way we talk about agriculture to focus on the specific practices and places from within the sector that give us a better water, that give us a water quality benefit? In other words, it sounds like you're asking about messaging, Doug. Is that a fair summary? How do we message this to folks to drive to move the needle?
It is, there's a couple of things in that question, and one thing that I would say is that yeah, clearly agriculture is the largest source of nutrients. But one thing, but in terms of pollution, you can look at pollution in a couple of different ways. Like they are the largest source of nutrients, but I frequently am as much or more concerned about like land development and inalterably changing hydrology and what development does to the health of local streams, because they may not be as nutrient enriched, but those streams tend to be the ones in the worst health, and it's really hard to reverse those impacts. And so that didn't directly answer your question, but when I talk about farms being the largest source of pollution, it is, but I would kind of put a bit of an asterisk by that, because it's kind of an addressable source, whereas, the altering of that landscape when you pave it, isn't. But how can you talk about agriculture to focus on the specific practices? Again, I'd go back to Lancaster County. There's a number of efforts there that are looking specifically at things like delisting streams and tying direct impacts of BMPs to local water quality and improved habitat and stuff. And, some of those efforts are fairly early on, but in talking to people, I want to get over and see some more of these projects this summer. But that seems to be a really effective way to engage people, because it's showing tangible benefits, but there's also this social aspect where if you're getting people along a reach of stream to coalesce around some activities, it kind of creates this peer pressure. Nobody wants to be like the only person who didn't participate or something. And so, yeah, I think there are some approaches like that that can start getting at that. And I think as time goes by, things like that can be fine-tuned and improved. But I think kind of tying it to local approaches and results, I think really can show some benefits.
That's great. I like the peer pressure component. Alan Gerard says, great presentation. I'm curious about your observation that those in agriculture haven't been involved as much as they could or should be in the Bay restoration conversation. Can you elaborate on any examples where they are involved, and what about that involvement might be working?
There is not strong enough involvement as there could or should be. In the last couple or 3 years, I've participated. The Bay program has an agricultural work group meeting, and I've been listening to almost all their meetings. I've talked to a good number of their current and former members, and man, an awful lot of people with agricultural background on that, tell me that they don't feel that they get listened to, that there's a strong sense that people are invited to participate in things so a box can be checked, that they had ag involvement, but there's a really strong sense amongst people with a genuine agricultural background that the issues and concerns they have don't get addressed. And a lot of them get into these social science type things because, a lot of questions to keep moving things forward, they get thrown like modeling type questions. And a lot of those people that I talk to say, it's these engagement issues that we really need to think about and addressing. And there's frustration that doesn't get moved higher up in like the Bay hierarchy.
It'll be interesting, I think, to see how we can influence funding mechanisms around things that are harder to quantify. I think that's part of the struggle, is that when you talk about changing minds, you can't necessarily put pollution reduction on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and that's something that was interesting to me because our funding tends to be geared often towards implementing BMPs and getting lots of BMPs on the ground so they feed into the model. But there's a mindset out there, and this is interesting, that maybe that investment's better spent on personnel to go out and work with farmers, routinely visit with farmers, to go back to like what they actually did in the early days, the Soil Conservation Service. And instead of prioritizing BMPs, maybe prioritize those personal interactions and like make sure that agent is reaching a farm like maybe twice a year or something and following up with them and just building those relationships. And that, as you said, that's hard to quantify, but you know, I think that's an interesting thought that I've heard a number of people express.
Yeah, and of course, all of that is predicated on having staff that have
Right.
some retention and the proper training. So there's a whole domino effect of things we have to keep in mind. If you do have other questions, pop them in chat. I'm going to jump in with something Karl said to me when we talked offline. You made the comment, Karl, that we've been using an engineering approach to solve ecological problems. And I just thought that was an interesting way to frame how you see this. Would you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was just saying, you know, from the Bay perspective, you know, the solution was always kind of like this, what stems from the, you know, the regulatory aspect, which is the roots of the Bay program, because the people came from regulatory agencies, is, you know, you always have a technological solution to address, you know, point source discharges. And when you got to agriculture and runoff, you know, it wasn't a point source, but BMPs kind of were the technology. And again, you go back to slather enough BMPs on the land and you reach your goals. And that's kind of the mentality that's ruled the effort. You know, it's a question of getting enough BMPs on the land, which never takes into these social issues, the economic issues and things. And Jim Shortle from Penn State, who wrote a whole book on agriculture and water quality, you know, he hits that on that a couple of times in relationship to the TMDL. He said, you know, the science and some of the thinking was good, and technological thinking behind some of it in a way was good, but it totally fell down when it got to, you know, these social and behavioral issues that really drive implementation and stuff. And that you know, a lot of the people, you know, that just wasn't the background of the people doing some of this. So, you know, I don't want to cast aspersions because I sat through those meetings and I totally understand the thinking behind it. But when you look back in retrospect, you say, yeah, if we knew what we knew today, we could have done better. And my hope is that we can take some of that and apply it and do better, you know, in the coming years.
We have just a couple of minutes left, Karl. Thank you again so much. And to all of you for listening in today and asking really important questions. I want to wrap up in our last minute with just some thoughts on next generation. What are you seeing things out there, commentary from folks that are taking over farms or getting into farming? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat what my neighbor tells me. And he's like 75, 76, something like this. And he's been tinkering with soil health type things for a good 30 years. And he really thinks that the hope is in the next generation, that the younger farmers coming in. He said, you know, when you talk about soil health, it's a process. You know, he's been doing great things and he's got results, but it's taken a long time. And he thinks that, you know, that's a tough sell with older farmers, but he thinks that with, you know, younger farmers coming in, you know, with kind of like a generational transition, that we will see quite a lot of more changes and you know, more integration of like water quality and these other aspects of farming. with some of the economic things. And so that's the words of a farmer. And so
And I hear them.
I give them a lot of
loud and
weight.
clear.
So yeah.
Karl, what's next in your series?
Oh, I think I'm probably going to be talking about why the modeling and monitoring has led to a lot of distrust in the farm community. And then after that, I think I'll be doing something that explores the social aspects of building trust and stuff, and what that would take. That probably would talk a little bit more about what they've been doing in Lancaster County. So those are probably like the next two. I'm taking a hiatus for the January and August issue to kind of mentally regroup, but it'll be start back in like the September issue. So
I'm looking forward to both of those. Everybody, thanks so much. I'm going to let you get back to the rest of your Wednesday. Do remember to check in with the Million Acre Challenge as you feel is the right way for you to engage. We love keeping folks informed and bringing in your ideas to the kind of work that we're trying to put forth across the Chesapeake Bay region. My best to all of you. And Karl, thanks again.
okay, thank you.